Hello everyone and welcome once again back to Of Cryptids and Creatures, the show where I, a very mediocre, tired college artist, attempts to draw creatures from Dungeons and Dragons to our own myths and legends in the real world. This episode we're going to be talking about our second cryptid, the Fresno Nightcrawler. Now, unlike our last episode where our cryptid could be traced back to the 500s, this is actually a relatively recent cryptid. Our first sighting of the Fresno Nightcrawler happens to be in 2007, with more recent sightings up until about 2017. And of course, this creature gets its name from where it was first discovered, Fresno, California. So the story goes that one November evening, a man named Jose woke up to his dogs barking, and when he checked his CCTV, he saw these two night crawlers, these about 2 to 3 foot tall, long-legged, walking pairs of white pants, essentially, walking through his yard. And when he woke up to show his brother this footage, his brother was like, "Yeah, I see it too." And eventually went out to investigate and saw footprints, though later investigators couldn't find anything. And they sent this video off to their local TV station to check it out, and eventually that made it to a History Channel show called Fact or Faked. And while the original footage is lost, there is still a recording of some grainy CCTV footage recorded from a monitor. Even with all of that, it was never actually proved whether this video that they sent in was something entirely made up or was an actual thing that happened, and hence we get our Fresno Nightcrawlers. And this isn't the only sighting of these creatures that has ever been recorded. At least 10 years later, another pair of these little guys showed up in Yosemite National Park, and there's been sightings of similar creatures in Poland and also in Carmel, Ohio, with a very similar creature who was more described as gray than the white that Fresno Nightcrawlers seem to have in a lot of the CCTV videos. But if you have a second, I would definitely encourage you to check them out because they are very interesting to look at. Now, you did hear me right if a couple of seconds ago you were like, you said that they were white and you are now coloring them in as some sort of beige. Worry not. I don't have a white marker, and coloring on a white piece of paper with white marker didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But what I end up doing with this moon is I kind of try to give it a little bit of light so it makes sense they're coloring. You'll see it at the end, and it works out. Just trust the process. Trust the process. You also definitely heard me say that these creatures like to walk in groups of 2, and you will see that if you actually go in and check out some of the footage and the images. They're usually in groups of 2, and websites usually go, there's at least 2 confirmed ones, but I figured let's have a whole group of them. I wanted to play with shapes and sizes because they're not super complicated shapes to draw, and I figured maybe having more of them with more expressions would be a fun little challenge, especially when it comes to figuring out how to shade this thing. And if you've seen any of the other videos or hear my intro at all, I don't know how to shade. I just attempt, and then when it looks okay, I go, yep, the video's done. I should definitely learn how to do that properly one of these days. Either way, I think we should get back to these little guys. So, of course, with all cryptids, there's alternate explanations for what people have seen. The ones for the Fresno Nightcrawler include video editing of someone puppeting pants on a wire, a bird, a misidentified deer that is standing strangely, some guy on stilts. That one would also require video editing. and my personal favorite, which includes a thing we also don't know if it exists or not, an alien. That's right, folks. The Fresno Nightcrawlers are also sometimes called the Fresno aliens. Let's explain one inexplicable thing with another inexplicable thing. We're really nailing it out here. Regardless of what it is and if it's real or not, people have pretty much called this one unexplainable and oddly endearing. It's a fun urban legend, and it's really added to pop culture in a very strange way. If you look up any sort of art of these guys, it's always adorable, and they're always just out there doing things. Like, what kind of threat does an amorphous blob that doesn't have arms really pose in the end, huh? As for more stories or explanations or anything in general about the Fresno Nightcrawlers, there's not much. Like I said earlier, Fresno Nightcrawlers are relatively new when it comes to cryptids. It's only been in the past decade and a half that we've really seen these things pop up. So there's not really much more that I can add here. So for the rest of the video, I guess I'm just going to be telling you about what's going on here in this wild ride of an image. So you can see here, I'm just kind of finishing up the color, and then in this next clip I just kind of go in and do what I've always been doing, which is I thicken up the lines and I try to give this piece a little more depth. I try to make the lines a little thicker to add shadow, because I really want you to see that they're in the foreground and that this moon that I've drawn that's kind of a little more orangey than usual is actually in the background, and they're on a separate plane. And so there I am, just kind of darkening that line, and then you see that I go in and I start making a really thick line around the moon, and then in about 3 seconds I give up and I go in with a marker and I decide this image is actually just going to have a fully black background, and I think it turned out relatively nice. I think it really does give you this idea of a night sky. So there I am, just kind of coloring that in, and taking more time than I probably need to on this, and then I make the bad decision of I don't really give the floor any color, which I think if I were to go back and do it, I would give it more color than just this kind of weird shadowy scribble texture that I did. And then at the very end I go in with my white pen and I give that moon some stars and some little comets and add some highlights with my white pen, as I tend to do, and that's it. This is my final image of the Fresno Nightcrawlers, with a couple more than you would usually see in, I don't know, the videos, or maybe even in real life. It's cryptids, who knows? But as always, this has been Of Cryptids and Creatures. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.